Hello, Blogging Heads viewers. I am Robert Farley from the Patterson School of Diplomacy and International Commerce at the University of Kentucky, and with me is Matt Duss from Wonk Room, one of the blogs at the Center for American Progress. How are you doing, Matt?
I'm well, Rob. Thanks for having me tonight. How are you doing?
I am doing very well. Just had a very long trip from Omaha, which was like 12 hours driving, and so driving is curiously tiring, even though you're not actually doing anything.
Yeah, I agree. I just got back about an hour and a half ago from Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. Mm-hmm. And I could have run home faster, I think, than...
Yeah, we made very good time. So this is a special maritime edition of Blogging Heads. We're going to talk about piracy and maybe, when we get to it, a couple of other things. We're also going to talk towards the end about a discouraging trend among our young liberal punditry, discouraging trend regarding the disfavor of Turkey. So we'll get to that eventually.
Right.
So yes, what are you imbibing tonight, Matt?
Well, in honor of our piracy discussion, I'm shaking up bourbon sidecars, which, as we all know, was one of the traditional drinks of pirates back in the 1700s.
Yes, no question.
I maintain that it was. I think it was Blackjack LaFleur who raided the port of Lexington and made off with huge quantities of bourbon, which he then shook up into bourbon sidecars and
Right.
drank on board the ship.
Right. Well, as long as nobody can prove it's not true, it could be true, and therefore you can cite it as a fact.
No, I'm pretty sure I read it on the internet. So.
Right, exactly. Did you also write it on the internet? Is there a Wikipedia entry that you... Anyway, that's not important. I am much more traditional. I'm drinking from my United States Naval War College mug here. The thing I'm drinking is a combination of Vanilla Coke Zero and Bacardi Peach Red Rum, which was unfortunately the only rum in the household. This is a traditional pirate drink, which I believe they referred to as grog.
Are you drinking it? You're drinking it from a boot?
No, from my Naval War College mug.
Okay.
I'm also wearing my USS Constitution shirt, and in case we get lost, I have my handy dandy Sextant right here, which I don't know how to use. But anyway, so all kidding aside, piracy is a serious issue, and it's come to a lot, or it's produced a lot of attention in the media over the past few days, really over the past few weeks. There are lots of pirate attacks off Somalia, off the Horn of Africa and the Gulf of Aden. Recently, a Saudi oil tanker was seized. Previous to that, a Ukrainian ship chock full of tanks and small arms was seized. And it seems to be an increasing problem. Lots of ransoms, lots of Navy ships out there. So, I don't know, do you have any initial thoughts on the issue of piracy?
I guess my first question is, it's a problem. Obviously, we want the seas to be secure and for trade and everything to move along kind of freely. But the question is, how much of a problem is it for the United States? Let's ask
right, and I think that's fair. I mean, there's an argument to be made that when we're talking about the financial numbers here, it's pretty minimal in terms of overall world trade. That in terms of ransoms and slow shipments and higher insurance rates, you're talking sort of in the double digits of billions of dollars, which sounds like a lot, but in terms of the entire global economy, isn't very much. And most of that is not specifically American. Of course, there are very few American-flagged merchant ships, and most of the cargoes in this area are not actually American. I guess my argument would be that if we are going to pretend to be a hegemonic power, that if we are going to, and even if we're not going to pretend to be a hegemonic power, one of the things that hegemonic powers do is they maintain freedom of the seas. The British fought pirates, the Romans fought pirates, and moreover, this is a really popular and I think responsible use of American power, right? Not firing cruise missiles into Somalia, but at least preventing Somali pirates from seizing yachts and seizing tankers and seizing merchant vessels and so forth.
Interesting. I mean, there is that. I mean, just from a historical standpoint, there's the interesting parallel to the Barbary pirates, which I don't know if you're familiar with Michael Oren's book Power, Faith, and Fantasy. He makes this argument. I think maybe others have as well, but just the experience, the United States experience with the Barbary pirates is one of the things that kind of served as a catalyst for the United States finally deciding, okay, we need to be a strong naval power and kind of setting off a chain of events that led to the writing of the new constitution with a stronger central government.
Right. I mean, there were some pirates. Yeah, there were some piracies. I mean, pirates from North Africa were all over sort of American and British and European trade for a long time, and I think that it was one of the many foreign threats that inspired the writing of the Constitution, and of course, it was also one of the first foreign military adventures that the United States engaged in. Now, I know that certain folks on the right, and Christopher Hitchens, if you think he's not on the right, whatever. Have actually made a connection between the U.S. conflict with the Barbary pirates and the conflict that's going on today, and have sort of put this all under a big what's the phrase? The Huntington phrase, the conflict between civilizations. Right?
Yes, that is certainly that's the argument that Oren makes. I mean, I should say that I think it's an impressive work of scholarship, but yes, that's his argument, that it's all one long war with the jihadists, which I just think is kind of nonsense.
Right, and I think that Hitchens and some others actually have gone, even a touch farther from saying it's all war against jihadists to saying, and only Americans are really willing to wage this war, because it's only Americans who actually shut down the Barbary pirates, right? The British and the French were just willing to pay tolls. That argument is historically absurd, given that the French conquered most of the pirate areas shortly after.
Well, I also have to note, I mean, how the other side is making the argument that it's all one long war with the Crusaders.
Right.
So.
Right. Well, I mean, I've seen, at least I had a Guardian comment as free piece on piracy the other day, and in the comments there were actually, and you don't know where these people were from, but there were people arguing full justification for the pirate tax. It was just skimming off what sort of was argued to be Western profits. And so it was interesting to see that argument. I'd never actually seen that argument regarding Somali piracy before, but it certainly was interesting. So, but yeah, no, I guess if you conceive of big powers as having any responsibility in the world, then it's the responsibility of the United States. The United States would be irresponsible if it allowed all these other countries around the world, which are also concerned about piracy, to try to deal with the problem without the most powerful navy in the world.
Right.
I guess would be how I would phrase it.
Well, I mean let's look at that, in terms of what United States interests are in Somalia, and then with these kind of Al-Qaeda connected, this group Al-Shabaab, which was an offshoot of, or I guess it was the youth movement of the Islamic Courts Union, although it's no longer solely a youth movement, as I understand it. So the U.S. obviously has an interest in preventing the growth and spread of this movement in Somalia. Right. So the question comes down to, what's the relationship between this movement and the pirates, if any?
Right. There's a blogger, he blogs for Information and Dissemination, and he blogs under the handle Galaran, and he actually made the argument that the piracy issue in Somalia is simply a convenient excuse for the United States to continue messing around with Somalia for as long as we want. And that really the key issue here isn't piracy, which is largely secondary, but is fighting against particular jihadist groups in Somalia, right? And this just gives us the excuse to be in the area and to muck around as much as we want. I don't necessarily agree with that, because we took piracy seriously in Southeast Asia as well. Although I guess then you also have some jihadist organizations, but not quite of the same scale that you have in Somalia.
Right. I mean, there's a direct connection. I think the leader of Al-Shabaab, Iro, actually trained in Afghanistan in the 90s, and a number of foreign fighters have come to join Al-Shabaab since the Ethiopian invasion, the U.S.-backed Ethiopian invasion.
Right.
So there are ties that are growing between this movement and the kind of broader global jihadist movement. That certainly, it's in the U.S. interest to kind of put an end to that or deal with that in some way.
Right, and really, the bit about the Ethiopian invasion of Somalia really bears emphasis. I mean, there are a couple of reasons why Somali pirates are so active right now. One is that or people are pirating. People are stealing you could use the word pirating. Various countries are...
Pirates pirate, Rob. That's what they do.
Yeah. Anyway, people are stealing fish from Somali traditional fishing grounds, and this is sort of cut down on the catch. And this is also my guess. I'm not. It's not really a guess. Actually, I've been told this. That in general, fishing stocks have depleted in the Indian Ocean, which would have been a problem whether Somalia would have been or whether Somali waters were secure or not. So that's one reason. Most of these people are fishermen and they're out of a livelihood. But the second, another important reason is the Ethiopian invasion. That piracy declined under the ICU, under the Islamist government, quasi half government of Somalia, and it's substantially increased since the what I think we can now say is disastrous Ethiopian invasion of 2 years ago.
Well, I think we have a comparison here to the opium trade and the Taliban in Afghanistan, right?
Right. No, right. I think that's fair.
So, I mean, we back this Ethiopian invasion, and so interesting here, that brings in a whole another group of actors. You bring in Egypt, who's had a long-standing kind of conflict with Ethiopia over issues relating to the Nile River. And so the question is, okay, what role is Egypt or sources in Egypt now playing for this Islamist group?
Right. And
it just, it I don't know what the word is, internationalizes much more this problem, I think.
Right. The bringing up Egypt is interesting because the Egyptians have now, I believe, agreed to deploy elements of their own fleet to the Gulf of Aden and to the Horn of Africa area, which is going to augment the European and the NATO and the American and Russian and a bunch of other countries' forces there. And Saudi Arabia, which also possesses a fairly substantial fleet for the area, after their oil tanker was seized by pirates, Saudi Arabia said they'll be stepping up their presence as well.
Right, and
which is interesting for the geopolitics of it all, with all those countries involved.
Yeah, which I mean, the Saudi role here. I mean, seizing this Saudi ship, and there was, I forget where I read this, but someone had commented. I mean, this is something that this Islamist group kind of made known that they did not approve of.
Right. And whether that was, I mean, okay, I guess I'll ask you this. Now, I think the press release from this Islamic group, or this Islamist group on the, and we should be clear here, and we'll talk about a little bit more about this later, but there is the pirates and the Islamists are not the same people in Somalia, right? They may be connected in some way, but they're not the same people.
Right, it's unclear, if at all,
how
they are. I'd have to say, my guess is some, but I've seen no evidence one way or the other.
Right. So the Islamist group that made the announcement about the seizure of the Saudi tanker said that piracy is fine, but we shouldn't seize ships from Muslim countries.
Right.
I mean, that may have been. I mean, that was genuine, and to some extent probably was genuine, but maybe somebody leaning on them as well to make sure that Saudi ships aren't captured.
No, I think that's very possible, but also, I mean, if I can kind of run a little far afield here, I mean, going back to the kind of what the lessons learned by the global jihadist movement from Iraq, just attacks on Muslims are not a good strategy.
Right.
So the possibility that someone's just extrapolating that out to attacks on Muslim trade, Muslim ships, Muslim, you see where I'm going?
Right. No, I definitely.
So yeah, I think it's entirely possible that that's just a lesson learned. And they're applying it here. But again, I haven't seen any evidence that pressure was brought to bear from Saudi Arabia, though I really don't doubt that it was.
Right. I mean, there's tons that we don't know. And we should also, in the tepid defense of pirates, that these particular pirates are, their attacks, I guess, to go through how a modern pirate attack happens, either from a mothership or from a land base. Small speedboats typically will approach a vessel. They will grappling hook the vessel, they will scale the walls, and then they will board, and they'll have automatic weapons and possibly RPGs. There are certain reasons why crews of merchant vessels can't be armed, and merchant vessels themselves can't be armed, that have to do with being able to enter any port you need to. And so typically, even for very large ships, you're looking at a small crew of 15 to 20, which against pirates armed with AK-47s, is simply doomed.
Right. I mean, you're looking at, this is kind of like a classic expression, asymmetric warfare. You got a huge ship, 15 to 20 guys, and it's one of the benefits of modern technology. You can have this huge ship using all these computers, and you can operate it with 15 guys.
Right.
but then who are they to stand up to a bunch of guys climbing aboard with machine guns?
Right. Exactly. I mean, it's not their stuff. Right. I mean, they just work here. Right. Nobody pays them to defend the Saudi oil tanker from guys with AK-47s. So, and it should also be mentioned in the pirates' defense that they usually don't kill people. The pirates rarely kill people. They're much more interested in ransoms. And they're even, to take a page from Pirates of the Caribbean, there are even apparently pirate codes for the treating of prisoners and hostages, so they're not to be harmed and not to be fed and everything else. So I mean, they are.
Thank God for the pirates' code.
Right, there's more guidelines really
yes.
than a legalistic approach. So back to this question of, and it's interesting that you mentioned the Taliban there, because the Taliban are an interesting issue along with this too. Some people have been concerned that maybe the pirates aren't actually working with Islamists. Maybe they are. Maybe the pirates aren't Islamists. But what these ransoms are doing, and in fact the Ukrainian ship, as far as I can tell, was just ransomed for several $1 million. This was one that was surrounded by U.S. Navy vessels and Russian Navy vessels, and the Ukrainians just paid off the pirates, apparently. That these ransoms and all this money flowing into Somalia, that you will inevitably find money into terrorist hands. That this black market space where money travels, that drug dealers also inhabit, which is why the Taliban can be friendly with opium producers. That human traffickers inhabit, and so forth. That terrorists inhabit this space, and pirates inhabit this space. And so when you give money to pirates, you are in some sense making it easier for terrorists to have the financial wherewithal to carry out attacks.
No, I mean that makes a lot of sense. I mean, is there a question in there? I mean,
I was just if you had any comment on the terrorist finance issue. I mean, I really don't know.
Well, I mean, just going back to the Taliban briefly. I mean, if we remember, I mean, when the Taliban controlled Afghanistan, they did a good job of stamping out most of the opium trade. But now, after years of war in Afghanistan, we beat the Taliban. They retreated. Now they're coming back in a big way. They've worked out these deals with opium growers, and they're now benefiting from the opium trade. I mean, which I find interesting, just because they've kind of made this very rational decision. Well, we can work with these guys and make money. So I don't see why that wouldn't be happening in Somalia.
Right. No, I mean, neither do I. That doesn't, just because we have no reason to believe it won't be happening doesn't mean it actually is happening, right? And so, and I think I alluded to this earlier, there have been a ton of people who have made the argument, sort of a lot of people who have been talking about piracy, and there have been people talking about it since 2000 and before, when you had a really big increase in Southeast Asia. And now you have a big increase in the Horn of Africa area and also around the Niger Delta. And some people have been arguing that, or as long as this has been happening, people have been arguing that there is the possibility of something called the piracy-terrorism nexus, where terrorists will either at the most innocuous do what we've been talking about, right? Use pirate money, but in terms of being less innocuous, pirates or terrorists might use pirates to carry out terrorist attacks, or terrorists might use the maritime sphere to carry out terrorist attacks, right? Either use pirated vessels to attack or ram other ships, or load a pirated vessel with explosives and sail it into Singapore or Boston Harbor or wherever. And as such, I mean, there's really a cost for having lawlessness on the high seas, because terrorists can exploit this space and can carry out potentially spectacular terrorist attacks. Now, that's how far we get with the theorizing. It doesn't appear that this has really happened very much, if at all. For some reason, there haven't been any big explosive spectacular attacks on Singapore. I mean, there have been some maritime terrorist incidents, but not a lot, and not many of them, or any of them, really seem to be associated with pirates. So, I wonder, do you have any thoughts at all? I mean, I've wondered this question a lot myself. If I were a terrorist, I'd think about piracy as a way to get terrorism done. Why have terrorists not actually done any of this?
Well, maybe it's just that the pirates are like, listen, we've got a good deal going here. Once we start doing terrorism, it's going to bring the international community down on us, and there goes our meal ticket.
Right.
I mean, that seems like the most obvious answer to me.
Right, right. The same way that drug dealers aren't interested in terrorism, they're interested in dealing drugs, right?
Yeah.
So they can't be.
But I mean, getting back to your point about the terrorism piracy nexus, I think just as we've seen over the past couple of decades, I mean, these terrorist organizations, whoever they are, Taliban, Hezbollah, these are learning organizations, and I think what we've seen is that they will get their fingers into whatever is going on around them. So I think it kind of stands to reason that there's going to be, if there isn't now, I would be very surprised if there wasn't some kind of relationship in the immediate, in the medium term between the Al-Shabaab and the pirates in Somalia. They worked out some kind of rent-paying deal.
Right.
I don't know.
Right. No, I mean, that makes sense to me, and it especially makes sense in the context of the sort of Al-Qaeda having a big presence in two of the major three pirate areas, right? I don't think they have much of a presence in the West Niger Delta area, but they certainly have a big presence in the Horn of Africa, and they certainly have a big presence in Southeast Asia. And so, I mean, yeah, there's some concern there.
Mm-hmm.
Probably talk just for a second about what navies actually do in terms of fighting pirates, because part of the concept here is what can the United States do and why should the United States do it. Obviously, speedboats are no match for a U.S. or French or Royal Navy warship, and so there have been a couple of incidents recently of pirates being killed in firefights with the Royal Navy.
The Indians blew up a ship, didn't they, or a boat?
The Indians did blow up a ship, and I haven't seen, it's been Thanksgiving, and I haven't seen the latest on that, but first, the Indians, they blew up the ship. They claimed the ship fired on them first, but who really knows, right? Mm-hmm. They blew up the ship, and then there was some mockery of the West coming from India for being too reticent to take on pirates violently. Most of the Western countries have been reluctant to actually seize pirates and their pirate ships because of various legal reasons. And the Indians just blew them up and then sort of taunted the Western powers for not doing similarly. And then
I'm sorry. Go ahead.
Oh no, you go ahead.
I mean, that really does raise a question. I mean, what laws apply for seizing pirates and dealing with them and trying them, capturing them on the high seas?
Right. Hey, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. That's a good question, and part of the problem is that the law is so antiquated that it allows you to do some stuff like, without a trial, hang pirates from the yardarm and so forth. So nobody takes that law seriously. And so, the EU and NATO and the United States and Russia have all worked out their own rules because, any of these states can arrest these pirates and take them back home and try them and put them in prison. Or at least they can do so if the pirates are attacking their own ships, like the French are doing this, right? The French captured like 6 pirates with commandos, and took them back to France and are going to try them. But that means putting these pirates in your prison system, and there are various legal complications associated with perhaps potential amnesty claims and so forth. And the Indians blew up the ship, and they sort of said, well, yeah, everybody expected the Russians to do it. There was a lot of work. There was a lot of talk about how these Russian ships, or this one particular Russian frigate, was headed for the Horn of Africa, and that when the Russians got there, they were just going to kick ass, right? Because they're Russians, and they killed people.
Was that the Peter the Great?
What's that? No, the Peter the Great is off Venezuela, but it's on the way. The Peter the Great is this giant Russian nuclear battle cruiser.
Right. Okay.
Occasionally breaks down, but it's in Venezuela right now for a friendship cruise with Hugo Chavez, and it's on its way to Somalia now. So it'll be there in probably 6 weeks or so.
Okay, so I mean, this is kind of like the big Russian naval "We're Great Again" tour.
Oh yeah. No, it's basically a way for Russia to say we're still around.
Yes.
But anyway, everybody thought, well, the Russians are going to show up, and they have their Spetsnaz, and they have their guns, and they don't care about killing people because they're the Russians. And it turns out that the Russians got there and they haven't been doing anything. I mean, they haven't been doing anything that anybody else has been doing. The Indians, on the other hand, blew up a ship. Now, I heard a report that indicated that this is a bit of a problem because the pirate ship they blew up was actually a ship that had just been seized by the pirates. And it was a Thai fishing trawler. And, I didn't have a chance to explore those claims before we started up. But that would be sort of a black eye for the Indians, and
yes,
a black eye for the Indians in addition to everything else that has happened over the last
yes.
4 days, which I think, has really pushed a lot of this to the back burner in any case. But there are definite problems with sort of very assertive uses of force in cases like this, right? It's very easy to get a lot of people killed if you're not careful.
Right.
And because the stakes are so small, it's really not worth the chances of killing a bunch of civilians with some kind of strike.
Right. Well, just getting back to the the whole question of like what would an appropriate legal regime look like for dealing with the piracy problem. I mean, what do you think the possibilities are of the U.S. engaging on this issue and using it as kind of an opening to deal with other issues? I mean, such as say the Ethiopia issue. Mm-hmm. I mean, is that just completely too far off, or does that sound at all reasonable?
I don't know that much about the Egypt issue. I do know that to the extent that stability in Somalia is going to be critical to solving the pirate problem, Ethiopia is going to be its own problem, right? Because Ethiopia, regardless of where the United States is going to push it, is simply not interested at all in Somalia, or in stability in Somalia. Ethiopia has very clear interests where Somalia lies, and it is not a coherent central government. It is, I don't know much about regional issues. In terms of U.S. participation in things like the ICC, the International Criminal Court, this could potentially give an Obama administration an opening, a domestic opening for increasing the U.S. commitment to organizations like this. Right, to having an international tribunal that can try pirates, that can imprison pirates, who are enemies of humanity, essentially. I mean, this is
because it sells itself. Pirates.
Right.
There are pirates. We have to deal with these pirates.
Right.
No one needs to explain what a pirate is.
Oh yeah. No. Eye patch or no, parrot or no. These are enemies of humanity, right? Mm-hmm. And nobody cares if you shoot them, right? Nobody complains when you shoot pirates, which is probably why the EU is sending a bunch of ships down to Somalia right now, because EU wants to display that it can actually do military stuff, but doesn't want it to be complicated. Go and fight some pirates, right? It's fabulous.
Yeah. All right, so then there's an interest in keeping this pirate problem alive, so that everyone can go and drill their navies against the pirates.
Right. I actually do think that sort of all the U.S. Navy in particular was really reticent about dealing with pirates to begin with, but I think that pirates have given a lot of countries, or a lot of navies, the ability to justify themselves domestically. And so they could say, well, look how important the Royal Navy is. If it weren't for us, then those two pirates would have escaped. And therefore buy us this new aircraft carrier.
Right.
And in fact, the Thai Navy did that a few years ago. They said, we need an aircraft carrier. The Thai Navy said, why? Fight pirates. Okay, with an aircraft carrier? But anyway, so they bought it. They bought the aircraft carrier. So yeah, I think there is definitely a domestic issue here, and it has to do with. But back to the ICC thing, it's a potential opening for the United States. And it's a multilateral issue. This is it's not just the United States that's there, right? It's all kinds of international organizations, and a lot of this, and the props to the Naval War College, by the way, which did a lot of this work. This falls under what the people in the Navy and other places have been calling the 1,000-ship Navy, which is this idea that naval power isn't necessarily competitive, it's collaborative. And so when your neighbor has a bigger Navy, that's actually helpful to you, because that Navy can go off and do things like fight pirates, can go off and do things like fight drug traffickers, can go off and do things like disaster relief after the tsunami.
Right.
And so this has been, the major theory. It animated the new maritime strategy that was produced by the Navy, and this is absolute working evidence of how this is supposed to work. Right, there are like 10 countries out there off the coast of Somalia hunting pirates, and they're all doing it collaboratively. They're not shooting each other. They're all friends, and that's how this cooperative situation is supposed to work. And that's an opening. That's a way to explain to people that international cooperation helps. It doesn't help just navies get aircraft carriers. It helps everybody, right? That the other countries are our friends. working with them in a multilateral fashion is really, really productive. And I think that's an opening for the Obama administration, not simply on the ICC, but also on a host of other issues, potentially a host of other issues.
Mm-hmm. Right. So what about the issue of independent contractors, Blackwater, these other security companies? What's the deal with some of these guys being brought on board these ships? What are the legal issues there?
Well, you get back to, and this is, not only is it really old law, but it's really complicated law. And so you get back to some issues of armed merchantmen, right? A merchantman is a non-warship.
Mm-hmm.
But if people on board it, if a lot of people are armed, then you have trouble getting into ports.
Mm-hmm.
Now, Blackwater has been really enthusiastic about the piracy issue. Blackwater.
I mean, they're building a navy, right? Is that right?
Oh, yeah. No, they are. They're buying ships and they're building, quote unquote navy, because they see a market here. They see an opportunity here to make some money, to fight some pirates, and to sort of solve the problem. If you put 30 armed Marines on every ship that went through the Gulf of Aden, there would be no piracy. Right, because the Marines would simply kill the pirates when they boarded. But you have the legal problem, and you also have financial problems associated with that. That would massively expand the cost of voyages, perhaps more than the problem of piracy expands the cost of voyages. So that's an issue. But yeah, I mean, Blackwater is very serious about it. The problem is that unless you can outgun the pirates, you have the same problem. If you only put like 3 security guards on a boat, and if you don't arm them, then why are they there? Who cares? Because pirates that's just more ransoms you're going to have to pay.
Yeah.
And so that's part of the problems with that.
Well, I think I read the window. You have about 15 minutes to deal with the problem, right? From the moment you spot the little buzz boat coming up to the moment they're on board.
Right.
It's about 15 minutes.
Once they're on board, navies are extremely reluctant to attack, because they risk blowing up the ship and they risk killing the hostages. Mm-hmm. And so, basically, you have to sound the pirate alarm, maneuver, hope there's a warship near. If the warship arrives, then the pirates are dead. I mean, there's no way. But if the pirates are not, another idea that's been floated, that's sort of around the Blackwater idea, is the idea of a modern day Q ship. Back in the old days, or back in World War I and World War II, the British Navy would equip certain merchant ships with lots of guns, and would use them to lure in U-boats. And then when the U-boat surfaced and attacked, the merchant ship would fire back. And so some people have been talking about, well, why don't we try this concept with pirates? And so like every 15th ship, you just load chock full of Marines or Blackwater guys, and you just waste the pirates when they try to seize the ship. And the idea isn't that you'll get rid of all the pirates, but that you will reduce the pirate level of success and increase the cost of failure, such that pirates will be deterred from actually attacking. It's an idea. It would be interesting. So, I don't know.
So here's an interesting question. I have a cousin who was in the Merchant Marine, and
I know where this story is going. Sure, you want to tell this on Blogging Heads?
No. Well, I was talking to him about this issue, and he raised this, which I thought was really interesting. He talked about this this reality show, Whale Wars, which involves this ship. I think it's out of Australia. I might be wrong. But it kind of tries to intercept Japanese whaling ships around Antarctica and stop them from hunting and killing whales. Mm-hmm. And, there have been occasions when, some of the activists on this ship actually boarded these whaling ships. They've tried to, they've attacked the motors, and and he says this is piracy. So, and this is a reality show. I mean, they're on camera doing these things. I mean, what do you have to say there?
If you make the definition of piracy narrow enough, then it will not fit this group. Right? If you insist that pirates must be armed and they must be acting for profit, those aren't terribly irrational definitions of piracy, right? Because most pirates are armed, and most pirates do seek profit because they don't just do this for fun. That said, whatever sympathies I may have for groups that are attempting to stop whaling, I think you're right. There are some serious legal issues here with what these people are doing, and it may not be according to Hoyle piracy, but it's something that's not terribly far off from piracy. Mm. And to the extent we start thinking about allowing merchant ships to heavily arm themselves, some of these whaling ships may decide to heavily arm themselves as well. And I really don't know what would happen if, when these guys crawled up on I haven't seen the show. When these guys crawled up on a ship, if the crew is armed with AKs,
Well, no, I think one of the
I don't know what happens.
Yeah, the captain of this ship, I think, was actually shot by a member of one of these Japanese ships, but he was wearing a bulletproof vest.
Right.
And was saved by that. But it just, I think, it's
but
not...
legally, legally you might be able to shoot them, right? Yeah. If they're climbing onto your ship, why can't you shoot them?
Right. But yeah, it's just interesting the way that these are the basic issues we deal with on land as far as protesting, demonstration. Well, maybe a little different. But, yeah.
Right, well, it's civil disobedience, right? It's a form of civil disobedience, although civil disobedience is, supposed to be against government targets, but can involve things that allow a violent response.
Right, well, the whole question of whether property destruction is terrorism, if violence is not directed at persons.
Right. Right, and when you allow that property destruction might be terrorism, then you open a whole bunch of doors, to claims like Earth First or terrorist or Greenpeace or terrorist and so forth, which, right-wingers may want to extend the definition that far, but it just doesn't make a lot of conceptual sense. Right.
So, I feel like I should bring this up now. Did you ever see I think it was early 80s, I think it was a made-for-TV movie with Christopher Plummer where he played a pirate where he and his son, boarded these kind of rich yachts and threw the owners overboard and stole their yachts. Do you remember this at all?
No, although don't some James Bond movies have that plot?
Well, there was Spy Who Loved Me, where he steals the nuclear submarines, but I don't remember the stealing the yachts bit.
Is it For Your Eyes Only? Doesn't For Your Eyes Only have a yacht stealing aspect to it?
Well, no, they shoot up the people on the yacht at the very beginning of For Your Eyes Only. I don't know if they're going around stealing yachts.
That's right.
But anyway,
and they go down and check them out, and you have the sharks and Roger Moore. And,
right.
I remember that.
Yeah, the sharks and all that. They tie them up. Yeah, but I'm talking about this because Christopher Plummer, who I knew, as we all knew, as Captain Von Trapp from The Sound of Music.
I've never seen The Sound of Music. I've heard it's terrible.
That's indefensible, Rob. It's a classic movie.
Anyway, I think of him as Mike Wallace. So anyway, go ahead.
He was a captain in the Austrian Navy, which I always thought was interesting. The Austrians had a navy.
The Austrians had a navy.
Yes.
Yeah.
And so anyway, at the end of the movie, Captain Von Trapp and Maria and the family, they escape from Austria. They cross the Alps, and then the movie ends, and you don't know what happens. And so here's me. I've seen The Sound of Music 10 times, and all of a sudden I'm sitting at home one afternoon when I probably should be out playing, and here's this movie on TV featuring Christopher Plummer as this really mean pirate throwing people to their deaths and stealing their ships. I'm like, what happened, Captain Von Trapp? He just went bad.
Desperation will drive a man to all kinds of different things.
And I really, it just, I immediately, with no problem whatsoever, invented this entire backstory explaining to myself how Captain Von Trapp had come to this.
Oh, well, listen, you've seen 12 Angry Men, haven't you?
Yes.
Okay, and have you seen The Verdict?
Yes.
Okay. Well, you recall that in 12 Angry Men we are, by the way, far from our appointed subject at this point.
Well, no, mine had to do with pirates.
Mine has to do with your last point, so just back off. 12 Angry Men, this defense attorney who doesn't really believe that his client is innocent presents the case to the jury, and he expects to fail and so forth. He's not even a character in the movie, but they talk about it.
Yes, of course.
And the jury decides that, against all odds, Henry Fonda convinces the jury to claim or to decide that the defendant is innocent.
Right.
Even though they say his own lawyer didn't believe him. I have always thought that lawyer in 12 Angry Men is Paul Newman in the verdict.
Wow, that's good.
That's why he became an alcoholic. That's what I think.
Yes.
So anyway, to the other pressing issue of the day, we have just experienced an American holiday, a traditional American holiday.
Yes, my favorite, in fact. American holiday.
I really like Thanksgiving. I'm not sure I would decide it was my favorite. It's a good holiday. I'm not speaking against it. I would just have to think some more about whether I decided that. Anyway, certain of the youthful leftish punditry have been making the claim that that turkey is not turkey is not an ideal meat. That really turkey is only there because of the tradition, and that in fact that tradition should be done away with. And I think you had some comments about that claim, which I find absurd. I love turkey. I really enjoy it.
Yeah, I like turkey too. And the thing is, turkey, there are a lot of cuts of meat, turkey being one of them. It's hard to make well. It's a big bird. You've got dark meat and you've got light meat that take different times to cook. And so to really roast it and cook it so that all these things are done and done well at the same time, it takes a lot of effort. I guess there's the taste thing, which you can't really argue with. If someone just doesn't like turkey, they just don't like it. But, this whole idea that we should just do away with turkey...
Right, and to be clear, these are the claims. The claims is not simply that turkey is done badly. The claims is that turkey cannot be done well.
Yeah.
Right, this is the argument that these people are making.
Yes. That it's just totally suboptimal, and that it's just this useless tradition and we should do away with it. Let's speak up for tradition, okay? The point is... whether we had these pilgrims and they sat down with the Indians, this is the mythology, but let's repeat it. And that's what they had. They had these turkeys here. And, they learned to cook the turkeys well. I think there's something to be said for these traditions where you take a tough cut of meat, whether it's a pork shoulder or a beef brisket, and you cook it in such a way that it makes it delectable.
Right. Well, and what's the point of Thanksgiving without the tradition, right? There's no point in the holiday.
Right.
It's just another day off. It's just it would be the worst holiday ever if you didn't have the tradition because it's on a Thursday.
Let's cook a prime rib for Thanksgiving. That's nonsense.
Yes, garbage.
Yeah.
And I think we should move ahead to questioning the motives of these critics of turkey. I know that one is my own associate Scott Lemieux, and he's a Canadian, so he can hardly be expected to respect American cultural traditions with the rest of these. I don't know. They seem to be Americans. Mm-hmm. I don't know. It's
I don't know. If this is what the age of Obama is going to bring us, questioning our most cherished meats and holidays, then, I have to get off the bus here. I'm sorry.
Right. Friends, this is not the change we need.
That's right, clearly.
The change we need.
I think the point was raised that you don't see turkey on the menus of the best restaurants, and I just don't think that makes much sense. You don't find pork butt on a lot of fine restaurants. You don't find brisket on the menus of a lot of high-end restaurants, but that means nothing.
You don't find good sausages on
Yeah.
No. That totally misunderstands the point. That's an irrelevant claim, I think.
Right.
Even if restaurant cuisine wasn't so faddish, it would still be an irrelevant claim. No, I can't back that at all.
Mm.
Now, to other change we can believe in, I've been hearing rumors. I've been hearing rumors of a new show called Hannity and Duss. Now, can you comment on those rumors at all?
I can't, unfortunately. Even though I'm sorry, I can't at all. I think we're still in talks. We were close, but then I made some really serious demands about the wet bar in my dressing room, which Hannity was apparently not willing to meet.
Well,
but
that doesn't even make any sense. What were you demanding?
What do you mean? I was demanding a full bar in my dressing room. Obviously.
If he's not going to meet that, then that's something you can't compromise on.
Seriously, I think that would be in his interest. He wants me handicapped, right?
Right. Well, I hear the promo is Matt Duss. He's a mountain of a man. can Sean Hannity cut him down to size? And I think that's a fabulous promo.
Well, I mean, also the problem was that I refused to sign the lay down clause in the contract, which, I mean, all liberals who go on Fox News have to sign the lay down clause.
But you were on Fox News, didn't you sign the waiver?
I was, but I was not debating. I mean, it's different with Shepard Smith.
Right.
You know, when you're on with Brit Hume or you're on with Hannity, they have the little, like, when I knock on the desk 3 times, that means you don't argue back. Everyone knows this. Right, and I'm just not going to sign on to that stuff.
Right. I mean, or unless they improve their offer.
Yeah. Right. Well, no, I mean, they give me the bar. I'll lay down.
All right.
I mean, I'll just say that right here on Blogging Heads. They give me the bar, I will lay down.
Well, now we know. We can forward this tape to their people, people, your people, and so forth, etc. All right. Well, I mean, do you have anything else?
No, thanks a lot.
All right. No, this has been a lot of fun. Thank you all for viewing this long. We're a little bit short, but I think we packed in a lot of information. And thank you very much, and we'll be back at some point. Bye-bye.
All right.